Hi, Shaka Hislop, Honorary President of Showrace and the Red Card. Thanks again for joining us on another edition of our 25 for 25 podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Makanda and Sharmane, authors of New Kids series, Our World, My Roots.
This is 25 for 25, a Show Racism the Red Card podcast. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
And Anna, I love the books. I really did. And of course, being from the Caribbean, I went to Jamaica first. I couldn't help it. I would love to talk to you all further about just about everything about the books, the process to bringing it out, why you chose the four countries that you did: Jamaica, Ghana, Zimbabwe, Nigeria. What prompted you to pursue these kids' books?
Sharmane, shall I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so my background, my dad's from Zimbabwe and my mum's from Scotland. And I grew up with both my parents in London. And I would say that although both my parents kind of educated me about their backgrounds, I think because I was in London and not either in Scotland or Zimbabwe, I was kind of far away from my kind of roots, I would say. My upbringing was quite British. And I didn't really think much of it growing up. And then when my daughter was born, that's when I started to that's when it came to the forefront that actually I come from a mixed background. And now that my daughter is from an even more mixed background, because my husband is West Indian, so he's Monstrasian and Jamaican, our children are this wonderful mix of cultures, yet neither me nor my husband know that much to teach them. So I started looking for resources online, for books or anything out there that I could kind of use to help teach my daughter more about her roots and for me to learn too, my husband to learn too. But actually there wasn't much. My daughter was born in 2015. And back then, even kind of, I know things have come a long way since then, but there wasn't kind of mixed or diverse characters in books, in fictional books, but kind of non-fiction, there was nothing really. There was kind of like generic books, which were kind of about like all countries in the world, but nothing specific. So I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if there was these non-fiction books based on each country in the world, aimed at children, to help them kind of introduce them to their culture and to help kind of caregivers and parents to be able to teach their children more about kind of where they're from. And obviously that's a big task because there's a lot of countries in the world. So at the time I was an accountant and just had a baby, so I didn't have any time on my hands. So I kind of parked the idea, and it was always kind of at the back of my mind. But fast forward to 2020 and the kind of explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement. And the idea kind of reignited in my mind. And I kind of thought, you know what? I really feel like now is the time, if any, to bring this to life. So me and Sharmane, being kind of best friends since we were 11, we were on the phone one day during lockdown and I was talking to her about the idea. She already knew about the idea, but we were talking about the idea and she was like, do you know what? Why don't we do this now? And that's kind of how it started. But like without me kind of going into too much more, I'll kind of let Sharmane give you her background as to why like she wanted to come on board and bring this vision to life too.
Please, go ahead, Sharmane.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously when Anna spoke about this idea back in 2015, I also had a lot going on. I was about to move to Singapore and, you know, I was kind of all about the travel. So I was like, yeah, sounds like a great idea, but I never really thought too much of it, if I'm honest with you. I think, again, like Anna said, fast forward to 2020 lockdown, we were having conversations around what was going on in the world, as I'm sure literally everybody was at that time. And we kind of, I mean, from my point of view, I was very much thinking that I very much have a big responsibility to contribute to moving the dial, at least on this conversation of kind of race and culture, thinking about, I mean, I don't have any children, but I have 9 nieces and nephews. And so really didn't want them to get to where we are in life, having had the same experiences. So when Anna mentioned the books again, I was like, actually, this is such a great way to be able to educate children from such a young age, and let them know a bit more about their culture and tell people about other cultures, so that we can kind of really understand and grow up in an environment of acceptance and looking at our differences and our similarities. So that was one of the reasons. Plus, I mean, I shared some of Anna's ideas or not ideas, but sentiments in terms of the fact that I'm also of mixed heritage. So my dad is Jamaican, my mum is Trinidadian English. And so I grew up in the UK in London as well. So very kind of removed from that kind of Caribbean culture, which I think is such a shame. And, you know, we'd love to be able to change that experience for the children who do end up reading our books.
So given that your mum is Trinidadian English, is there a Trinidad to come? I know one person in particular who's very keen to see that happen.
Well, we've been talking about new titles, and Trinidad may have come up in the conversation. So
I know a few people. Just let me know, Sharmane, and you a few people who can make this happen. Now,
okay.
Listen, in all seriousness, I find the entire process so fascinating. You know, first of all, let me say, the books are great to read, and I sat and I read them, and just the way that they're constructed, the way that they're put together, highlighting so many of our similarities, yet some of our differences that make us unique, and it speaks to this multicultural world that we now experience, and is becoming even more so. And I think is important, as Anna said, to show a lot of our histories and a lot of what makes us unique. And of course, we at SRtRC and Red Card have always felt that kids are the perfect opportunity, perfect avenue to have some of these discussions. So it's as much as we talk about what countries may come, and jokingly around that, and I recognize the personal connections to some of the countries that are already published. Why these four? Why Nigeria, for instance, sake, outside of that personal connection? Why are these four important to highlight?
So I think obviously the ambition of doing all the countries was it was something that we couldn't do. We actually were gonna initially do 10 countries. Now looking back at it, we were absolutely bananas, because 4 countries was really a lot of work. But the reason we whittled it down to these 4 countries, so I'd say 2 of them are personal. So Zimbabwe is my heritage, Jamaica is Sharmane's heritage. And then we looked at, okay, so how can we make the biggest impact within the UK? So we started looking at numbers of people from these countries, and they turned out to be Ghana and Nigeria. And so that's why we settled on those ones to start with. And yeah, I think it was a tough decision because there are so many countries that we wanted to do, but we just thought, do you know what? How can we make the biggest impact to start with, and then the rest will come.
And talk me through. So I'm really interested to know how the book and what was included came about. And you start each with be curious, be confident, be kind, be you, which again I find so powerful to lead with especially in talking to kids. Let's start there. What prompted that?
Oh, what prompted that? I think
I would say so. I think what we don't come from a background of writing, so it was I suppose maybe our process wasn't a traditional process. And because this was really about a passion project, it wasn't about the writing for us. It was about actually how can we get this information to children in a way that's engaging, positive, dispels stereotypes, and just, I don't know, impactful way. And that involved everything that you see in the pages of those books we really kind of tore apart and really analysed as to why we were doing it. We didn't just put something there just because. Everything was a why. So I think the be confident, I would say we started off with our values. Before we even started the book, we looked at what our values as a company, and what did we want to kind of, I would say, kind of,
what's our message?
Yeah, what was our messaging? And that they were the kind of, that was the messaging that we started with. And it took a little while to kind of get it kind of succinct, and a way that kind of spoke to children. But I would say we started off with our messaging, and what messaging did we want to give with the books as a whole, and going forward, kind of, that was, I would say that's where it came from.
And it's kind of almost like, I guess, a summary in a sense of, we want people to feel when they read the book. Essentially, we want them to be confident. We want them to go on and be kind because of some of the things that they're learning. You know, we want them to be themselves and feel like they can be themselves because they're learning more about their culture, and, you know, actually they can connect with a few things perhaps that they've read, or even just if it's, say, you know, I'm reading the Zimbabwe book because my best friend is from Zimbabwe, I can connect with my best friend a bit better because actually, in summary, I can do all of those things as well. I can be kind with it, and I can be confident with the knowledge that I've learned, and now I know about her and her family maybe, and the way that they do things. So it's kind of like, a bit of a summary.
and we talk about, you know, these shared similarities between kids the world over as they come together, and again, each book follows that same theme around family, play, learn, cuisine, food, and to dream. Again, I'm really interested to understand your process in what categories you focused on, and why you felt it important that each book, regardless of country, kind of follow that same step, that same process. Why was that so important in framing the works?
I think.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, in terms of once we started doing all of the research, we wanted the books to be kind of like a one-stop shop of information of that country. And so, if you think about it, there's so much information there. Can't necessarily put everything in all at once. So for us to put it into those kind of under those titles was a really kind of clear way to earmark and present in a quite succinct and kind of maybe a structured way all of the things that we had come up with in our research. So I would say that was kind of one of the reasons why, in terms of the structure. But of course, we wanted to, again, highlight those similarities versus differences, because the point is that I think a lot of the time people, we all do it, we kind of look at somebody else and we immediately think about the things that make us different, and that automatically, I think, kind of leads us to certain decisions or certain thoughts or certain kind of judgments that we have about people. So if we take that away and say, actually, there's still a lot of things that are very similar about us all, actually, hopefully, it kind of removes all of those feelings of, you know, I've got to be feeling this way because that person is still a person just like me. You know, we eat foods, or maybe if they're different foods, actually, there are still some things that are really very much the same about what we do in our cultures. Sorry, Anna, if I let you.
No, absolutely. I think I would just say, I think we were keen to have the structure the same across all books because we wanted an element of consistency. So when you picked up our books, you knew that you were reading one of our books. And also in terms of like being able to kind of not like make comparisons across the countries, it just made sense to do it that way. I think in terms of like the similarities and differences thing, I think I think growing up, like a bugbear of mine was, or more than a bugbear, a frustration of mine was especially the way kind of, I would say African countries are portrayed in the media. It's very negative. And so when there's these like real kind of strong stereotypes of what we see on in the media in terms of like poverty in Africa, and that's kind of all you see poverty and you see safari, and like that's kind of it. And it was really important for me to kind of dispel that, because I think by putting all these different kind of categories in the book, it showed you that actually there was a lot of things that were similar, but there was things that were different, but they were positive differences. And like, for example, to the point where we showed different places where people live, because I think, and this is going to be kind of, I don't know, a bit controversial, but I know a lot of people make references to where people live in Africa. Like they'll say mud huts. And that's something that makes me really furious. And it's ignorance. And we wanted to show that, yes, people in some rural areas of Africa do live in huts, and that's okay. And that is fact, but that is not the whole of Africa. There is cities. There's people who live in apartment buildings, in mansions, and that is so important to know, just breaking it down kind of like that. And I think the media has a lot to kind of, can be blamed for a lot of answers. For kind of the messages it puts across and the kind of lack of information that it shows. So we wanted to show this broad range of information so people could kind of just have an introduction to all these countries.
Listen, I totally understand. I mean, coming from the Caribbean myself, I've had my fair share of questions around whether we had roads and what types of houses we live in. And I mean, the only thing I insist on pointing out is a lot of times to the point you make around mud huts. So for instance, in the Caribbean, there's no need for AC. So houses can be fairly open and allow the breezes to come through. Those are just differences that don't make the environment any less. It's just how you cope with your circumstance. We don't have winter, so why do we need to have houses that are fully closed in? And I think that's an important takeaway from these books, that we adapt to our circumstances, whether it's around food, whether it's around play, but at the same time, we share so much, and in terms of dreams and who we are, and the way the books are constructed highlights that, and I find that so enriching to me, and so enriching, I expect it to the kids who pick up these books. And just on a side note, I was having this discussion with a friend of mine who's English, and I remember saying to him the first time I came to England, and kids were playing with conkers. I had no idea what was going on. I'm like, what
is this?
What kind of mad game? But it just speaks to your environment and how you adapt, and how kids are able to find joy, fulfillment, and connection in the raw tools that they are presented. Let me ask this, Anna, because I'll direct it to you first, because you mentioned it. You don't come from a writing background. So what were some of the bigger challenges you had in getting these books to market?
So I think it might help for me to explain the process of writing the books, because they are non-fiction first and foremost. We started off by doing the research. So we did the research, we did loads of research, and then we kind of whittled down the research into the distinct headings. And then we looked at it and we were like, this looks really boring. For a 5 to 7 year old, facts, as they are written down, are really boring. So how can we bring these facts to life? And then we kind of started introducing, we introduced like characters, but they weren't really, it wasn't characters as you see it now. It was kind of random characters along the way. And we thought, okay, we're onto something here. Then we sent it to the editor that we worked with, and she was like, it just doesn't flow. She was like, you need to have something that kind of makes it
all together.
All fit together. So she kind of really helped us understand or come up with our final format. And that was to introduce characters that people actually got to know. And and then they kind of followed you through the book. So it was a learning curve. I would say we were, Sharmane is, I would say I was always maths at school, she was English. So I would say we lent on her English skills in terms of like the writing. And then we did have help from like the editor and the input. And then we kind of got people to read over it. And I don't even know how many versions we did, Maine. There were so many versions.
I don't know. I don't even
It was a challenge. It was a challenge. But do you know what? I think sometimes actually because we didn't come from a writing background, there's beauty in that, because I think we kind of don't know what we're getting ourselves into. And maybe we're not as picky as someone who comes from a writing background. So we just went with it and we learned like along the way. And hopefully the way we've presented it now and it's finally turned out is a way, well, I mean, we've got amazing feedback from the book, so hopefully we have succeeded in that. But yeah, it kind of was a bit, it was a long process, but yeah.
And given that process, given that learning curve, what's next?
Good question, Maine, go for it.
So yeah, no, of course. I mean, Anna mentioned earlier that we wanted to write a book for every country in the world, and that is still the big dream. Of course, we can't do that all at once, and we have to kind of break it down in bite-sized pieces. So, of course, we'll be looking at new titles. Hopefully, maybe 4 to 5 a year would be our goal at this point. But of course, you know,
that's quite an undertaking. 4 or 5 a year is an undertaking. Even me, and I don't know anything about writing books.
It is. To be honest, now we've got the format, and each one will be quite similar in terms of the way that we present those ideas. At least we know now how it all works, how it all fits together. We've tested the process, so we feel like actually the writing is not necessarily the thing that's going to take time. It will probably be finding the right illustrators to keep up with us in terms of being able to put it all together. But yeah, no, I mean, of course, we've got to really build the business in terms of the sales of the current books as well. So that's a real focus for us at the moment as well. So yeah, I think those 2 things are the main things. And maybe down the line, if things are looking good, we'll look at kind of different languages in terms of translations, versions of the book, which will be really exciting. But yeah, no, there's a lot. There's a lot to do.
I can only imagine, and I really am excited by it all. Listen, I have to say, I love the books, even as an adult, just kind of looking back and connecting with so much, and at the same time learning so much about those countries in Africa that I've never been, while I can associate with Jamaica more closely. For me, it was enriching just to see and understand. And I think that's the beauty of having that similar structure to each book, that you understand how each kid adapts to their circumstance, how much we actually have in common, while I think inevitably human nature kind of draws us to the things that separate us. Sharmane, Amanda, thank you very much for your time. It really has been. It has been wonderful speaking to you and understanding the process by which we go through, by which you've gone through to bring these books to market, to bring a smile to older guys like me, to bring some education to the younger generation. Please continue your way. Sharmane and Anna, thank you so very much.